audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Shachi ma'am, am I audible
Yes,
clearly?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. So shall we start?
Yeah.
Yes, so our speaker has already joined us. Uh, Salim sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, okay, okay. So we shall start. Just a minute. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this special lecture titled "Evolution of the Concept of Human Rights in India." I am honored to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Salim Javed sir. He is
Thank you.
assistant professor in Department of Law in Patna University. He has completed his graduation and post-graduation in law from Aligarh Muslim University, and he has done his PhD from Patna University. He has published 16 to 20 research papers in national and international journals. He has presented many national and international conferences. He held the position of HOD of the PG department of Patna University from 2017 to 2020. He is a member of Senate and Syndicate Patna University and organized many national and international seminars and talks. He is a member of IQAC Patna University and coordinator IQAC Patna Law College. On behalf of School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Sharda University, I welcome you, sir, to this webinar.
Thank you
Uh,
so much.
Salim sir, now you can start with your lecture. We are eagerly waiting to listen to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afraf. I will be starting once I am able to present my PPT. Uh, can you hear me, Dr. Afraf?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Very good morning to each and every one of you, dear friends. To begin with today's lecture, organized by Sharda University, on a topic which is unfortunately not even in the priority list of those who are responsible for the enforcement of the same. So, friends, first of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks in favor of patron of this talk, Dr. Anubhav Assist, Dean School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Dr. Pramod Kumar, HOD, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Sarda University, and also to the convener, Dr. Sakshi Agnihotri and Dr. Rafraf Sakir, for organizing this talk on a topic which is very close to my heart, and that is human rights. Friends, starting this, before starting today's talk on the specific topic, which is evolution of the concept of human rights in India, I would like to tell you something in the beginning itself, because without having this background, pupils not having law background may feel difficult to understand the process of evolution in India. As far as my lecture is concerned, if you can see the PowerPoint presentation, my content of this lecture will cover the general introduction, including meaning of the term human right. Because if we all are not in a position to understand that which rights are popularly known as human rights, then we may not be able to justify that how this concept traveled from 539 BC to 1993 in India. Second part I will be discussing in brief, and that will be about the different kinds of human rights. Although human rights cannot be separated from each other, but for the sake of understanding of the different peoples, especially for the understanding of those who are not from law background, the human rights were classified in different kinds, popularly known as human rights of the different generations. Uh, then I will be discussing the evolution of the concept of human right at international level in brief. Friends, discussing the evolution of the concept of human right at international level is very important to understand that how this concept of human right finally came to India. If anybody is from, all of you is from law background, so they may be able to understand that there are an special ingredient for any independent and sovereign state at international level, and that ingredient is in the form of capability to comply the international obligations. That means a state is bound to comply the international obligations. And being a teacher of human right or being a student of the subject of human right, I personally feel that the concept of human right came to India not only because of the fact that our country was uh, uh, so confident to protect the human rights of the people of our country. It was a sort of obligation which was imposed on the part of the international bodies to comply the international obligation. Finally, we have incorporated or enacted a special law in the form of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. Actually, in this lecture, I will be just trying to let you know that how this process of the incorporation of human right started at international level somewhere in 539 BC by the uh, by protecting some of the rights of the citizens by a great king Cyrus, which was who was a Babylonian king, and he for the first time passed something which was recently known as the first Magna Carta on human right. We will be discussing about that in detail. So friends, uh, in the beginning, I will be starting this uh, talk with the meaning of the term human right, because if we were able to know the meaning of the term human right, then only we can justify that how this concept finally came to India. If I start directly the meaning of the term, then you may not be able to understand that human right actually is associated with which discipline or which branch of the law. So, in the form of general introduction, if you can see the PowerPoint presentation, I have written a word human right is associated with international law. That means human right, which is the part and parcel of the municipal law or the part and parcel of the Indian law today, actually it is originally the segment and part and parcel of the international law. According to theory of a state sovereignty, only a state creates rules of international law, and as such, rules are valid for them alone. Actually, those who I don't know whether anybody in the audience is from law background or not. Rafraf, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you
Students,
are
Is there a,
audible.
okay,
sir,
thank you.
students are from humanities background.
Nobody is from law background. I think some of
No,
my students might have joined.
No, sir. From our side, our students are from humanities and social sciences.
Okay, then no problem. So I'm just trying to let you know that uh, as far as the international law is concerned, there is a school of thought in international law, and they were of the view that only state can be the subject matter of the international law and not the human beings and not the individuals. But that theory was finally discarded, especially after the Second World War, and uh, this this is the reason why it is believed that after the Second World War, the concept of human right finally progresses and flourishes. It was so because before, prior to the Second World War, the human beings and individuals were not treated to be the subject of the international law. But after the Second World War, people started to treat individuals as a subject of the international law, and as a result of which, finally, the concept of human right in today's format came into existence. Although the concept of human right is as old as the human civilization, but whatever we used to study today in the form of the human right is the result of the Second World War. That's why it is generally said that the biggest contribution of the Second World War in positive sense is the incorporation and adoption of the concept of human right. So in general, you can say that human right is the part and parcel of the international law, and it is the result of the Second World War, because after the Second World War, the individuals were treated to be the subject matter of the international law as well. As far as the meaning of the human right is concerned, uh, this term human right is known with several names like inherent right, inalienable right, birthright, basic right, and most popularly, fundamental right. Most popularly because in maximum constitutions or constitutions of the world, these rights were incorporated in the in with the name of the fundamental right. But in very uh, general sense, it is said that it is very difficult to define the term human right due to differences in cultural background, legal system, ideology, and economy, because every country is having its own capability to implement and enforce the different rights to the citizens of the citizens of their own country. But in very general term, it is defined as the rights that all people have by virtue of their humanity are human rights. In short, you can say that the rights which we are having because of the fact that we are the human beings are known as human rights. I generally used to define this term human right by referring the quote of the Holy Book Quran, where it is stated that uh, human beings are the best creation of God on the earth. And to be best creation of God on the earth, whatever rights we are required is incorporated in the form of the human right. Because unless we are not having the right to life, we are not having the right to equality, we are not having the right to dignity, we are not having all the rights which we were going to discuss in the form of the human right or the fundamental right, then we may not be able to make the difference between the man and the animal. So I believe that the right or the list of rights which differentiate or which makes a difference between the man and animal is known as human right. If you go through the definition given by the different scholars, I have just selected one of the definition given by one of the biggest international law scholar, Dr. D.D. Basu. And he was of the view that human rights are those minimum rights which every individual must have against the state or other public authority by virtue of his being a member of human family, irrespective of any other consideration. That means while enforcing the human rights, state should not consider any other aspects. That means state is state is bound to protect the human rights on the basis of the principle of equality before law and equal protection of law. This is the general definition of the term human right. But friends, since you all are might be knowing, or I am going to let you know that in India, human right is covered under the special enactment which was passed in 1993, popularly known as Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. And that particular act in itself given a statutory definition of the term human right under section 2D of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 itself. Uh, the definition is in front of you. According to this definition, human right means rights relating to life, liberty, equality, and dignity of the individual guaranteed by the Constitution. That means the first part is talking about the fundamental rights embodied. The second part of the definition has widened the applicability of the human right or the implications of the human right. The second part is saying that or embodied in the international covenants and enforceable by courts in India. Can anyone tell me what do you mean by the word covenant? What is this covenant means? Any student? Okay. Can anyone tell me who actually makes the law?
Parliament, sir.
Okay, very good. Parliament used to make the law. If it is so, then can you tell me who is responsible body or who is the parliament for making the international law? In other words, I can ask you that who makes the law at international level? Obviously, at municipal level, law is being made by the state. But what about the making of the law at international level? Unless you are not able to understand these basics of the international law, you will not be able to justify that how universal declaration of human right becomes compulsory to be implemented within the territory of India. So my question is how law is being made by, how law can be made at international level? Any guess? I'm just asking because I know that none of you is from law background.
It is made with the cooperation of different countries. So different countries like support and form a body that make
Is
laws.
it
United Nations.
Yes, sir.
yes,
Sir, I suppose it is done
yes.
by the United Nations.
Okay, thank you. United Nations organization is a responsible body for making of law at international level, no doubt in it. But what is the technicality of the making of law at international level is being incorporated in the word covenants itself. Actually, what I feel is that in United Nations organization actually made available an appropriate environment and place for the different member states to reach to a point. And if more than one states, after having a complete discussion and deliberation, reach to a point, generally those uh, agreements or treaties were adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations, and after the adoption by the General Assembly, Sometimes those agreements and treaties were known as covenants. Here I am referring you the meaning of the term covenant simply because of the fact that section 2D is going to be implemented within the territory of India. And since we are discussing the evolution of the process of the human right within the territory of India, so you must be able to understand that in India, the Indian courts are not only confined to enforce the rights we, the citizens of India, is having under the Constitution of India, but Indian courts are equally competent to enforce the rights which were available in the different covenants in which India is or has been the signatory. That means if India signs a treaty or a covenant, and if any new right is incorporated in that covenant, although that right is not given place within the ambit of the Constitution of India, even then the Indian courts are competent to enforce those rights within the territory of India, subject to the exception, because the word covenant and enforceable by courts in India in itself incorporates its limitation. And the limitation is that every right which was which incorporated in a covenant cannot be enforced within the territory of India. Only those rights which were not contradictory with our own traditional, cultural, and the religious life, they can be enforced by the Indian court. So this is the very important and statutory meaning of the term human right, which is incorporated under Section 2D of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. After this, I'm just let you know in short that how and why the human rights were classified into different kinds, or why these rights were referred with the name of the different generations. Actually, if you remember, the process of articulating or codifying the human right started in the same way in which we are here to study after the Second World War. That means we can say that the process of codifying human rights started after 1945, or after the establishment of the United Nations organization. If you remember, in 1945, the world was divided into the two different blocks. One block which was headed by the USA was known as capitalist bloc, and the other bloc which was headed by the USSR was popularly known as capitalist bloc. When the process of the drafting of the human right started, the capitalist bloc was having influence over the drafting committee, and still that influence exists. And because of the influence of the capitalist bloc, the Americans were of the view, Raf, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. The Americans were of the view that first of all, we will have to protect the basic rights, and according to them, the basic rights were the civil and political rights only. They were of the view that first of all, we will try to protect the civil and political rights of the people, and if we were able to protect these rights, then we can think about the protecting the other rights. That means you can say that they were of the view that first of all, we will have to save our right to life, then we can think about the right to work, and then we can talk about the right to food and right to shelter and others. If life is in danger, we cannot think about the food and we cannot think about the shelter. Once the process of the drafting was in a concluding position, the other bloc, which was led by USSR or the communist bloc, raised their voice and they stated that we are not going to pass this enactment unless the other rights in the form of the economic, social, and cultural rights were not given place. As a result of which, finally in 1948, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was enacted, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights incorporated both the rights in the form of civil and political rights, and also the rights in the form of economic, social, and cultural rights. And that's why if you can analyze the Universal Declaration of Human Rights having 30 different articles, I can say that Article 2 to 21 is related with civil and political right, and Article 20 to 27 is related with economic, social, and cultural right. But cultural right. The Americans or the capitalist bloc was of the view that civil and political rights are the first generation right, and the other rights in the form of economic, social, and cultural rights are the second generation human right. So this was the ground on the basis of which the rights were classified, although from the enforcement point of view, there is no difference between these two rights. All the rights, whether the civil and political right, economic, social, and cultural rights, they all are going to be incorporated or implemented by the member states or by the signatories equally. That means the member states cannot make the difference between the different types or kinds of the human right. Later on, concept of third generation human rights also came into existence, in which the right to self-determination, right to development, and minority rights were placed by the different scholars. Again, a new concept of human right in the form of fourth generation human right also came into existence, in the form of healthy environment, aspect related to bioethics and digital rights. These are known as fourth generation human right. Although we are not concerned with the kinds of the human right, my focus is to discuss the evolutionary process, that how the concept of human right finally came into existence, especially in India, because our topic is confined to the evolution of the concept of human right within the territory of India. But since I have already let you know that it is not possible directly to discuss the evolution of the concept of human right by referring the Constitution of India or by referring the Protection of the Human Rights Act 1993 only. Friends, I will be very briefly discussing the process of the evolution of the concept of human right even at international level, very briefly, in the sense that I am not going to discuss the provisions. I am just quoting the references which were found contributory in the process of the evolution of the concept of human right at international level. If we talk about the evolutionary process of the concept of human right at international level, we can make the demarcation of the development of the process of the concept of human right in two different segments. First, prior to the Second World War, and second, after the Second World War. Generally, credit is given to the Second World War, that Second World War is only responsible for the development of the concept of the human right. But it is not like that, because the process of the evolution of the concept of human right started earlier before. If you can see in this slide, uh, in between the two segments of the evolutionary process, this is a sort of cylinder which was uh, given by the King Cyrus when he conquered the Babylon. Cyrus was the king who was addressed for the first time as a great King Cyrus. It is simply so because he was absolutely changed the process of the rule of warfare. Can anyone tell me that what is the meaning of the word rule of warfare? What is warfare? Any student? Rule of warfare. What is the meaning of this word rule of warfare? Anybody?
The military operation, anything like that.
How this military operation can be correlated with rule?
Sir,
Actually,
rule
I
that
am.
Everything is
Okay,
fair in
okay.
love and war.
National
It is
humanitarian
not
law.
like that. It was actually this statement that everything is fair in love and war was absolutely right prior to the development of the concept of the rule of warfare. Actually, the meaning of the word rule of warfare in present scenario simply means rules to be followed or complied of during the war itself. ऐसे रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशंस जो ड्यूरिंग वार कंप्लाई किए जाने ऑब्लिगेटरी एंड कंपल्सरी है, those rules are generally known as rule of warfare. Actually, prior to the development of the international law or prior to the coming into existence the international law, or I can say prior to the establishment of the League of Nations of 1919, and especially prior to the establishment of the United Nations Organization 1945, the rule of warfare was governed by the same principle as stated by some of you, that everything is fair in love and war. But after the establishment of the League of Nations, and especially after the establishment of the United Nations Organization, the rule of warfare is the subject matter of the international law. Today, if somebody used to taught international law, he used to teach a exclusive chapter titled as rule of warfare. Actually, you cannot justify the contribution made by any of the king or a scholar like that of the Cyrus, unless you were not able to know the rule of warfare of that time. In 539 BC, when Cyrus conquered the Babylon, the rule of warfare of the time allowed him to make all the soldiers of the Babylon the slaves. He was absolutely allowed by the rule of warfare of the time to compel all the citizens of the Babylon to confess the religion of the Cyrus. It was the rule of warfare of the time that the conquering that the peoples of the conquering state was treated inferior to the peoples of the state who conquered them. As you might have seen either in the films or in of history, that the Britishers treated us inferior to them. It was one of the reason why they treated all of us inferior to them. It was so because they have conquered us. Although how they have conquered us, it is a different story. But since they have conquered us, so they were, according to the rule of warfare of that time, they were allowed to treat us inferior. So in this circumstance, when the Cyrus conquered the Babylon, he edicted 3 rights on this cylinder, or on this something which looks like cylinder in the Akkadian language. In Akkadian language, he edicted on this cylinder 3 rights. First, he asked the soldiers of the Cyrus to free the slaves. That means he was raised a voice against the slavery. Second, he allowed the right to choose their own religion. That means the peoples of Babylon was allowed by the Cyrus to follow and to profess and to practice their own religion even after the conquering. Third right, which he was addicted on this cylinder, was that he established racial equality. That means he abolishes the racial equality. You can imagine the importance of this Cyrus Cylinder by referring this fact that this cylinder was treated to be the first Magna Carta on the human right, and the rights which were addicted on this cylinder is being translated into all the 6 official languages of the United Nations organization, and the poster of this translation is being handed at so many places or in the headquarters of the United Nations organization. So Cyrus Cylinder or the King Cyrus was treated to be the first person in the world who perhaps had evaluated or contributed something in the process of the concept of the human right. Then after that, you all are knowing the importance of the Magna Carta, Petition of Rights, United States or Constitution of the United States of America, then Bill of Rights of 1791, and finally the League of Nations of 1919. That means after 539 BC to 1919, so many peoples and so many institutions were contributed to protect the interest of the human beings, but unfortunately the League of Nations was not able to stop the Second World War, and Second World War happens, and what actually the result of the Second World War we all know. Since you all are from humanity, may I ask you that how Second World War was? Somebody is saying something.
तो बोलना पापा को फीस फीस पे कैंसिल हाँ
Hello. Afraf, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Shivani, Shivani, please switch off your microphone. Shivani, can you hear me? Yes, sir. She has switched off her microphone. Yes, sir. You can
Okay,
continue.
thank you. Oh, actually, I was just trying to ask from the student side that if somebody asks you that how Second World War was different from the First World War. War is war, but why so much hue and cry is always while discussing about the Second World War is being stated. What was the main point of difference between the two wars? Can anyone tell me? Any student?
Sir, there were gross violations of human rights in Second World War. The primary objective was racial discrimination against Jews, and nationalism was the main factor in Second World War, which led to such massive destruction across the world.
Yes, actually, you are very close to the answer I was expecting. Actually, what is the meaning or technical meaning of the word war? The technical meaning of the word war is used to refer the war between the soldiers of the two countries. But what happens in the Second World War? It was not this Second World War was not actually confined to the war between the soldiers. Actually, this was a sort of war sometimes between the soldier with civilization. As you have yourself quoted, that Nazi soldiers were of the view that unless each and every Jewish is not going to be killed, we cannot think of the establishment of peace at international level. That means their slogan was to eradicate all the Jews from this planet without making the difference between the good and the bad. That means in case of Second World War, it was hardly matters that whether you are a innocent citizen or you are a soldier. if you belongs to a particular class or community, you may be punished. This was the main difference between the First World War and the Second World War, as a result of which the not only the loss of economy was caused 10 times, 20 times more than the First World War, but the loss of humanity was greater than the any previous wars. So after the Second World War, the world was very afraid of not only of what actually the world has lost in the Second World War, but actually they afraid of if any third world war happens, then what at all is going to happen. And due to that afraid, the process of the establishment of the United Nations organization was started, and whole world was of the view that if we want to protect the human beings or the human civilization, then immediately we will have to work towards the establishment of a exclusive institution at international level, which may look towards the disputes of the two different countries. As a result of which, finally, the United Nations organization was established in 1945. If you go through the process of the establishment of the United Nations organization, or through the process of the making of the UN Charter, you will find that some of the countries, especially country like Panama, raised a voice during the process of the drafting of the UN Charter that we must incorporate an exclusive chapter within the ambit of the UN Charter dealing with the human rights. But since the world was so hurried to have an exclusive institution, nothing was incorporated in the UN Charter directly connecting or relating to the human right. Although indirect references were there, but no exclusive chapter was incorporated in the UN Charter dealing with the human rights. As a result of which, when in 1946, in 1945 itself, when there was a meeting of the General Assembly of the United Nations organization, and exclusive task to draft something relating to or protecting for the human rights was given to the Economic and Social Council, which is an specialized agency of the United Nations organization. And the Economic and Social Council, after having that reference, establishes a drafting committee, and that drafting committee started the process of the drafting of the International Bill of Human Rights. Finally, that International Bill of Human Rights, after so many ups and downs, आप सब भी जानते हैं कि we all are living in a country, we all are following the same constitution, we all are having the same laws for all of us, but even then the making of law is how much difficult we all can see, especially in the present scenario. You all have seen the farmers agitation, you all might have seen the agitation against the NRC and CAA. So you can multiply the problem. If we talk about the making of the law at international level, when we all are living in the same country, we all are having the same constitution, but we are not ready to have the same enactment for all of us, then how it is possible at world level? But anyhow, after one or the other ups and downs, finally in 1948, the world concluded on 10th of December 1948 and adopted a resolution in the General Assembly of the United Nations organization, and that resolution was given a title known as Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And 1948, finally the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948 was enacted, and unfortunately this declaration was simply a declaration and this was a standard to be achieved by the civilized nations. That means Universal Declaration was absolutely silent about the fact that if any signatory is not going to enforce the rights incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then what action can be taken against that member state. Due to this, the other international covenants were enacted. The difference between the declaration and the international covenant was that declaration was not enforceable in nature, but international covenants were having the enforceability, as a result of which you might have seen that under section 2D of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 in India, we have incorporated the enforcement of the rights given in the different covenants by the Indian courts. So this is all about the development of the concept of human right at international level. I think these are some of the references of the development of the human right at international level. I think now I should directly come to the main point, and that point is the evolution of the concept of human right in India. If we talk about the development of the concept of human right in India, we can categorize this development into the two different segments. First, with reference to the constitutional framework, uh, we are fortunate that the Indian Constitution is incorporated from the very beginning. Those rights which today we are popularly referring with the name of human right. From the very beginning, the Indian Constitution has incorporated maximum rights which were incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948. It is simply so because the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Constitution of India was going neck to neck. Yani during the same time frame, both the documents were in the process of the drafting. जिसकी वजह से maximum provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is being incorporated in the Constitution of India from the very beginning. But still there are so many countries for whom the incorporation of these rights in their constitution is a target to be achieved. But let us start the evolution of the discussing the evolution of the concept of human right in India. First, the Magna Carta of the any legal document or any a Magna Carta for any of the country is the constitution of that particular country. The Indian Constitution is having the references of the approximately all the human rights which were incorporated at international level, whether in the form of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or incorporated in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or incorporated in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, or incorporated in the different optional protocols. These are the three different level of documents which exists at international level for the while enforcing the human right. उन तीनों को taking together, we can say that our Indian Constitution incorporated all the human rights given in the three different documents, taking together in one document in the form of the Constitution of India. And the first reference we can find in the preamble of the Constitution itself. If you go through the language of the preamble of the Constitution, you will find the words like justice with reference to social, economic, and political. This is nothing but the incorporation of the concept of human right as incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as well as incorporated in the different international covenants. The second word which is incorporated in the preamble of the Constitution is the liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. You will find different articles relating to all these segments in the different articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and also in the different international covenant. Third is the equality of the status of and of opportunity and to promote among them all. That means Indian Constitution has incorporated not only in the chapter fundamental right, but even in the preamble of the Constitution, which is said to be the very heart and soul of the Constitution, the words which were directly incorporated or related with the fundamental rights which we were having at international level, even in the different declaration or the covenant. That means the heart of the Constitution in itself incorporated the principles of the principles incorporating the enforcement of the human right within the territory of India. Next is the most important segment of the Constitution of India, and that is the fundamental rights chapter. Can anybody from humanity background can let me know the basic feature of the fundamental rights? Can anyone tell me that what is the basic feature of the fundamental rights?
That is right to live,
That is
right to live, that is life, right to basic food, and right to security.
no, I'm just asking, I'm not asking the right incorporated in the list of fundamental rights. I'm just asking the basic feature of the fundamental rights.
Sir, hello.
Yes.
May I speak, sir? It is
Yes,
right
please.
of citizen against states, against the
Yes.
atrocity
Yes.
of
Very
state.
good. Actually, this is the answer I was expecting. Actually, fundamental rights are the rights against the state. It means if any of fundamental right, or I can say if any right of the citizen of India incorporated in the list of the fundamental right is being violated by anybody, then the enforcement of that right is claimed against the state and not against the individual who is responsible for violating that fundamental right. That means the enforcement of the right is the responsibility of the state. And in case of the violation of the fundamental right, we used to approach the state and not the violator of the fundamental right. So I can say that the chapter fundamental right, which incorporated different articles of the Constitution of India from Article 12 onwards, is nothing but the somehow incorporation of the human rights incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948, and it is also equally incorporated the rights incorporated or given in the different international covenants at international level. Yeah, that means the two covenants which were passed in 1966 and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights which was incorporated in 1948. These three documents taken together can be discussed in one chapter of the Constitution of India, and that is the fundamental right, like right to life, right to equality, which incorporates so many articles of the Constitution, then right to freedom, which also incorporates so many articles of the Constitution, and right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, right to constitutional remedies, as you might have heard about Article 32, and which talks about the remedies against the violation of the human right. So these are the fundamental rights which incorporates in itself the human rights which was incorporated in the different international documents. The fundamental right chapter is nothing but the incorporation of the human right within the ambit of the Constitution of India. Can anyone tell me that what is the difference between human right and the fundamental right?
Yes, sir. Sir, human rights, which we get from nature.
Whether we can enforce the natural rights within the territory of India while referring the Indian courts. Okay, forget about. Can you tell me the horizon of human right is wider than the fundamental right, or the horizon of fundamental right is wider than the human right? Anyone? Actually, there is no legal difference between the two. Only the difference is of the horizon. The fundamental right is limited in nature in the sense that fundamental rights are incorporated between Article 12 to 32 of the Constitution of India only. Although the ambit of the human right is so wide, that's why under section 2D of the Protection of Human Rights Act, it is stated that the rights given in the Constitution of India as well as rights incorporated in the covenants, if enforceable by Indian courts, can be said to be the human rights for the citizens of this country. So these are the list of the fundamental rights, and these fundamental rights are nothing but the direct incorporation of the human rights within the ambit of the Constitution of India with reference to the enforceability. That means these are the rights which are going to be enforced if violated by the different remedial institutions in the form of the Supreme Court of India and the different high courts. Any doubt? The next part of the constitution, which is the incorporation of the, which is the result of the incorporation of the concept of human right. Rafraf, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. Third part of the constitution, which is having the reflection of the human right incorporated within the ambit of the Constitution of India, and that is in the form of the directive principles of the state policy. Suppose if somebody asks you then how directive principles are different from the fundamental right, can anyone let me know that how directive principles are different from the fundamental right in brief? Anybody from political science? Hello? Any
So
student?
fundamental rights might be in our favor more than directive principles, as directive principles are in the state's favor as well.
No, I'm just asking the technical difference. Uh, okay, I am telling you the very basic difference is incorporated under Article 37 Clause 2 itself. Actually, fundamental rights are enforceable with the help of the constitutional remedies in the form of the writ jurisdictions given under Article 32 and 226 of the Indian Constitution. But theoretically speaking, directive principles of state policies are non-enforceable in nature. That means directive principles of a state policy cannot be enforced with the help of the court within the territory of India. Why I have stated that theoretically speaking, it is simply so because although this is a different story, that when the Constitution of India was in the process of drafting, the maximum members were of the view that uh, all the rights which we were incorporated today in the form of the directive principles of a state policy must be incorporated as a fundamental right itself. But some of the members, like Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, and some others, were of the view that we cannot give this much responsibility and liability on the state. So they suggested that these rights must be divided into the two segments. One in the form of the fundamental right, which are having the enforceability, and the other must be the directive principles of the state policy, which cannot be enforced. But it was equally incorporated in the Constituent Assembly debate that as the economy of India progresses, the Indian Parliament will try to convert these directive principles into the fundamental right. But unfortunately, we all know that how much effectively our Parliament used to work. Unfortunately, our Parliament is having time for everything, but not for proper legislation. As a result of which, the Supreme Court of India has taken lead, and by referring the Constituent Assembly debate, the uh, the Supreme Court of India, and by exercising the power given under Article 32 in the form of the constitutional remedies, started to convert these directive principles into the fundamental right under the umbrella of the Article 21, which talks about right to life and personal liberty. This is the reason why, even if directive principles of the state policies are non-enforceable, I am discussing in front of you, or I am letting you know that the directive principles of the state policies are very much contributor in the process of the development of the concept of human right in India. Today, there is no demarcation as such between the fundamental right and the directive principles of the state policies from the practical point of view, because all these directive principles were, if not all, then maximum of the directive principles were already being converted into the fundamental right under the ambit of the Article 21, which talks about the right to life and personal liberty. It is the biggest contribution being made by the Supreme Court of India, and that's why it is said that even that directive principles of a state policy is the part and parcel of the human right in India. This is all about the constitutional framework dealing with the evolution of the concept of human right in India. The legislative framework is the last segment of this today's talk. Legislative framework means, since we all are knowing this fact that the Constitution of India was incorporated or adopted in 1950, from that time the Supreme Court of India was given responsibility as a protector and guardian of the Constitution of India under Article 32, and the same responsibility with wider ambit was given under Article 226 to the different high courts. But what was the actual position about the protection of the different rights within the territory of India? If you analyze the pendency of the suits, even before the apex court, even before the Supreme Court of India, you will be surprised to know that it is not possible to do SPD justice within the territory of India, even in case of the violation of the fundamental right which was incorporated under Article 12 to 32 of the Constitution of India. So what about the other human rights? That's why in different international obligations and treaties, India was the subject matter of criticism by the different member states of the United Nations organization. They were of the view that unless and until an exclusive enactment is not being passed by the Indian Parliament dealing with the protection and promotion of the human right, till then the human rights situation uh, cannot be improved within the territory of India. And especially, friends, during 90s, India was in so many parts of India was having one or the other point of differences with the main extreme government. For example, in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, in state of Punjab, in all the states of northeastern hill states like Nagaland, Tripura, and all, there was one or the other unrest going on, and the peoples of the world at different international forums used to criticize India for not establishing an exclusive institution dealing with the protection and promotion of the human right, because they were of the view that India is not doing so just to uh, shadow the unnecessary utilization of force by the Indian soldiers within all these disturbed states. Just to counter the international bodies, after becoming the signatory of the optional protocol on civil and political right in 1992, India finally started work to establish an international institution for taking care of the protection and promotion of the human right. India was so hurried that since Parliament was not in session at that time, so on 27th of September 1993, by passing of an presidential ordinance, which is an exclusive power of the President of India, and National Commission for Human Rights was established. This presidential ordinance of 1993 was placed before the Lok Sabha on 18th of December 1993, and on 8th January 1994, finally, after receiving the presidential assent to the bill, the special enactment came into existence known as Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. By the passing of this act in India, we were able to establish a special enactment which is responsible for protecting and promotion of the human right within the territory of India. And I think 3 levels of the court was supposed to be established, and among them, at the top level, the establishment of the National Human Rights Commission was targeted. And under chapter 2 to 4 of the Protection of Human Rights Act deals with the National Human Rights Commission, this National Human Rights Commission is given exclusive power under section 12 of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. I think I cannot go into the detail of the power and functions and different composition and the constitution of the establishment of the National Human Rights Commission. I'm just referring you that chapter 2 to 4 of the Protection of Human Rights Act deals with the National Human Rights Commission, and section 12 is an exclusive provision dealing with the power and functions of the National Human Rights Commission. The other level of the establishment which was given in this Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 was the State Human Rights Commission, which was to be established by each and every concerned state, as a result of which, although National Human Rights Commission was established in 1993 itself, but the State Human Rights Commission was established in different states in the different years. This State Human Rights Commission was also given power and function like that of the National Human Rights Commission, subject to the limitation that State Human Rights Commission was allowed to exercise those power and functions relating to the subjects given in the state list. Last institution which was expected to be established by the passing of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 was the District Human Rights Court, which is still a target to be achieved. Maximum states of our country were not yet established the District Human Rights Court, which was given place under Article 13 and 31, under Section 30 and 31 of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. This is all the legal and the constitutional framework in which finally a process which was started in 539 BC by the issue of the Cyrus Cylinder reached to the country like India in the form of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. Rough, I think this is all about the evolutionary process. If anybody is having any question, you can ask them to ask the question. Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Participants, if you are having any questions or any kind of remark you want to make, floor is open. You can ask your question or you can type in chat box as well. Though I think the lecture itself was so detailed, so informative, I don't think anyone is having any kind of after having this detailed lecture.
I think some of your students are from outside India.
Yes, yes. Some are some international students are also there.
Oh, I was just guessing by their. So if they want to ask any question, you can please ask them to ask.
So international students are welcome to ask if they are having any kind of queries related to human rights and its relation and place in Indian Constitution. They can ask.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I think nobody is having any question.
Yes, sir. As I said, sir, your presentation was so detailed and in depth. I don't think there is any scope of confusion right now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then I think the session is over.
Sir, there is a question. Is there any international student in India? Okay, sir can give the legal perspective to you, but as an Indian citizen, I can assure you that you are having all kind of legal freedom in India. Over to you, sir, to this question.
What is the question, ma'am?
Sir, question is there any freedom to international students in India? I don't know what kind of freedom this student is referring to, but
okay, I think I may be able to answer his question. Friend, actually, as far as the rights of the citizen of India is concerned, the rights of the citizen of India is incorporated within the ambit of the Constitution of India. But if you go through the list of the fundamental rights given in the Constitution of India, you will find that except some of the rights, the rest of the rights are open for the peoples of the world, not for the citizen of India only. For example, right to life. Right to life is not for the citizens of India only. That right can be enjoyed by anybody, whether he comes to India in the form of the resident, in the form of the visitor, or reside in the form of the citizen. Everyone can enjoy this right to life within the territory of India. Forget about the constitutional ambit, friends. Since I have already referred you that not only the rights incorporated within the ambit of the Constitution, even the rights which were incorporated in any of the international covenants can be enforced within the territory of India, subject to the restriction that if those rights are against the uh, cultural heritage or the religious faith and beliefs of the peoples of this country, then they cannot be enforced. For example, if somebody wants to enjoy the right of right of movement without bearing the cloth, they cannot be allowed within the ambit of the territory of India, because that amounts to the obscenity within the territory of India. So every individual is having all the rights to be enjoyed within the territory of India, except some, like you cannot claim the right to job in the same way as the citizens of India can claim. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
Yes, thank you. My name is Muhammad Lamin Jane. I'm from the Gambia, West Africa. Well, I
Welcome.
just have some question for Professor, that is Doctor. Yeah, coming from the Gambia, we came from
Yeah.
like a tyrant regime, that is a regime who violate the human
Yeah.
rights of Gambians. And even right now I'm speaking, we are going through a transitional justice system in my country, where we have a commission
Okay.
where both the perpetrators and the victims will come there to confess their crimes, and also the victims also will try to explain what they experienced during the first regime. But coming to India, I'm seeing similarity in the Gambia compared to my country during the previous regime. I'm seeing in India where police, during the arrest of some people, they will torture them, they will beat them mercilessly. So, how is the government trying to solve those issues? Is it normal for like police to torture people on the street?
Actually, I think this is a very interesting and very intelligent question, because uh, let me tell you that even India is having the same institution like your country is having, in the form of the National Human Rights Commission. But unfortunately, since I was not have gone into the detail of the working of the National Human Rights Commission due to the paucity of time. Otherwise, I think your answer might have been, your question might have been answered by itself. As far as the special institution which was established in the form of the National Human Rights Commission within the territory of India is concerned, if you go through the functioning of the National Human Rights Commission, which was incorporated in the power and functions given under Article 12, you will come to the conclusion that in India, this National Human Rights Commission was established simply to, I can say, simply to give and reply to the international bodies about our concern to the protection of the human right. Why I'm saying so? It is simply because of the fact that the National Human Rights Commission, which was given power under Section 12, is given power only to recommend. That means National Human Rights Commission is simply a recommending body. This institution is not given power to take its own decision. If you go through the working of the National Human Rights Commission, you will find that after 10 years of its establishment, the Supreme Court of India constituted a committee headed by former Chief Justice of India, Justice A. Mohammadi, and he was given task to recommend that what should be done, as a result of which the National Human Rights Commission may start practically working in a better way. The first suggestion given by the committee of Ahmadi was that this committee must be given the judicial decision, power of judicial decision. Now I am coming to your point. I think it is clear to you that in India, the committee, which is established in the same way as a committee was established in your own country, is a simply recommending body. It is not having the power to take decision of the good or bad. It can only recommend that who was responsible for the violation of the human right of whom. Now, the rest of the things depends upon the willpower of the government to either to take the decision against the responsible person or not. This is the basic difference. In India, the national institution is not going to take its own decision. It can only recommend to the government to take action against the responsible person, or it can become a party by filing a writ petition before the Supreme Court of India or the High Courts. This is the only power the institution within the territory of India is having. That's why in India, the biggest violator of human rights even today is the police department. Approximately 60% violation of the human right in a year is being committed by the police itself. Okay?
Yes, thank you, sir. I think you have partially answered my question, and which I'm very, very glad that you mentioned the political will that is from the state government. I believe
if you go through the so many reports which has already been submitted by the National Human Rights Commission, at least 5 yearly before the Indian Parliament, the recommendations and suggestions were still not being implemented, and this is all because of the lack of willpower.
Exactly, and that's where my query is. I know that the institution cannot prosecute; they can only recommend. They can only recommend and then submit their recommendation to the government to enforce. So this is where my concern comes. That is the political will from the government. So now, in case now the government don't have the will to prosecute perpetrators now. So now, as citizens, what can we do?
It's all depends upon the willpower of the government. If government is not going to take action, then all the works done by the National Human Rights Commission is going to be thrown in the van.
So now, as citizens now, what can we do to at least try to showcase our dissatisfaction and our agony to the government? What can we do now?
Actually, we can, being an academician, like Justice A. Mohammadi, being an academician, we can publish the different papers, we can have the symposium and seminars to be organized, and we can send the report of all those events to the central government, that if you want to see the result on behalf of the National Human Rights Commission, then under Section 12, government must give National Human Rights Commission a judicial power, because if it is simply a recommending body, if it is having a power to become the party to the suit, then how the speedy justice can be expected if the case is again going to be filed before the Supreme Court of India, which is having more than 3 crores pending cases. So this being a law-abiding citizen of India, we can only do this in the form of an academician.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, most welcome.
Sir, there is
Anything
a
else?
yes, sir. There is a question by a faculty.
Okay.
Tomar, he is assistant professor at SHSS. So his query is, Dr. Salim, would you please show some light on the issue of cultural relativism with regard to universal nature of human rights? Is there any paradox between the two? Please comment.
Actually, I think I have asked the same question, but I myself has asked the same question, but in a uh, but with in a different perspective to one of the best speaker I have ever heard on human right, and the speaker was Professor Dr. D.P. Burma, the former Dean, Banaras Hindu University. When he was talking about the different human rights in the form of the first, second, third, and fourth generation rights, I asked him a question that if we all are talking about the human right in the form of the universality, then why we never talk about the rights of the women of the Saudi Arabia? Because we all are talking about the rights of the women, we all are talking about the freedom must be given to the women, and Saudi Arabia is very much the part and parcel of the different international instrument and the covenants and even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I asked him that, sir, if Saudi Arabia is the part and parcel of the different international covenants relating to the human right, then why international body is not pressurizing government of Saudi Arabia, whatever may be the form of the government, that the rights of the rights of the women of Saudi Arabia must be protected, and they must be given the same freedom as the women of our country is having, because India and rest of the European countries are the parties to the same instrument in which Saudi Arabia is also. He has very beautifully replied to my query, and he stated that the same declaration and the same covenant has given so many exclusive provisions which allow them to protect their own cultural life and the cultural way of life and their heritage. And therefore, even after becoming the party to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and even party to the different international covenant, they all are having the way of life which we actually feel is against the ambit of the concept of human right. So I think the cultural life, universality of the cultural life is not expected in any of the international covenant, because everyone is having its own way of the cultural life, and that cultural life is being protected by not only by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, even by each and every covenant and international instruments we are having at international level. Any query, ma'am?
No, sir. In chat box, there is no more queries. Okay, so considering the time constraint, here I would like to close the floor for question answer session, and I would like to move forward towards the last session of this talk, and that is thank you. So I would like to give a vote of thanks. So first I would start with Dr. Salim Javed. Thank you so much, sir. Your presentation was
Welcome, ma'am.
elaborated, and the best thing about your presentation is the easy language, because you know these things are so technical,
Thank you.
very complicated, but you made it so easy for us. And you just started from the starting, how it evolved and how it developed, and you continue till today's modern institutions related to human rights as well, and also in the context of Indian constitution as well. So thank you so much, sir, for such a elaborated
Welcome, ma'am.
talk, and we really we would like to hope you again on board and to continue our collaboration. So
Thank you so much, ma'am. Always ready for.
thank you, sir. So kind of you. Next, I would like to thank Dr. Rafraf Shakil for being such a helpful colleague, and she has done all the hard work for this webinar. So thank you, ma'am, for that. And I would also like to pay my thanks to School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Dean Dr. Anubhav Vasist, our HOD Dr. Pramod Kumar, and all the faculty members for their kind support. And last but not the least, all the participants who took time to attend this webinar, and I really hope that you would find this very helpful. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Sakshi ma'am, and thank you, Salim sir. We are now
Thank you
closing
to
this
all of
meet.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.